Hello, welcome to another episode of Perspectives on Tyranny. My name is Andy Toe, and I'm interviewing Dr. Carlo Celli from Bowling Green University. He is the editor of a book titled Economic Fascism, Primary Sources on Mussolini's Crony Capitalism. We will be discussing about Mussolini's economic policies, his personal life, and what led to his downfall. Hope you enjoy the episode. Good evening, Carlos. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I am doing good. It's actually a pleasure to talk to you. Give us a little bit of a background on you right here, like your academic background, areas of study.
Academic background, I have a PhD from UCLA, did a PhD in Italian, did a dissertation on Renaissance era historian named Guicciardini, just published a translation of his secondary works. He was one of Machiavelli's colleagues. Published 2 books on Machiavelli, got another one coming out. There at UCLA, obviously, I got pulled into the cinema world, started teaching Italian cinema, and I published, I think, 4 books on cinema.
Like a lot of the Italian New Wave?
No, I did one on Benigni way back when that came out. Met him, had a chance to meet him, great guy. Then did one on Pontecorvo, who did Battle of Algiers. Then I did a book on Italian cinema history. And then I did one on world cinema, which is sold well in Poland for some reason. I guess I should write them back, but I never do. Anyway, other than that, I don't know. I keep writing books. This one, the one that you're interested in, this was done on commission. The publisher there, Axios, wanted first an abridged version of The Prince, and so I translated that for them. And then the editor there wanted a collection of all of Mussolini's statements on economic policy.
What caught your attention for that project, per se?
I have a degree in economics from the University of Virginia. I worked in the savings and loan scandal back in the late 80s. I've been all over the place.
Wow, okay.
Anyway, so the guy, the editor there, who's, is one of these people who, when you speak to him, other one is like Benigni, you're talking to somebody, cars sometimes have 4 or 5 gears, and you realize that these guys have like 8. And you're like, So he was a very smart fellow, and I liked talking to him. And he said, everything done on fascism is sort of these cultural and political things, but nobody really has come out with anything what they actually did economically. And he wanted that collected. And so I said, okay, that sounds interesting. Why not? So I went through the Opera Omnia. Mussolini, as you know, was a journalist.
That's right. Was he? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was a journalist back in World War I on the Italian front.
I think that this brings up a lot of jokes, which I'm not going to go into about him being a journalist. Let's just leave it there.
Okay, that's fine. No.
But he wrote a great deal throughout his life. So his collected works are about 20 volumes of all of his writings. And he didn't stop once he came in politics. He was still writing his speeches and everything. He was a journalist. So I came across those Opera Omnia. I used to like to go to the University of Virginia library, and you'd learn where all the different books were, and then you sort of get lost in some place and you start enjoying. I love doing that. And so I looked at those and I said, yes, I'll do a project. So I went through there and I tried to find everything he wrote about economics. Didn't take that long. And I collected them into this book. If I could say one thing about that, the thing that really struck me about Mussolini's writings is I could not find a position which he held continuously throughout his career.
Really? So it was just kind of go with the flow?
I think it's a little bit more sinister than that. He was early career. He was very much anti-war. He was very anti-clerical. He was against, abortion, any of those, hot button issues. He was very much on one side of them. And then once he came and was able to get power, he completely switched.
Really? Okay. Wow.
I think any kind of understanding that you want to have of him, it needs to be couched in those terms. That he was very much after power, and what it took to get power, what position what positions he would hold, and that really bothered me. The editor eventually asked, do you want to do an in-depth study of your own take on Mussolini? And I, quite frankly, after having spent enough time with him translating these documents, I said, no, I think I've had enough of them.
Was there like any particular document or like writings from Mussolini that I guess that struck you odd, or something, I guess, quote unquote, fascinating about him?
Well, if I did one of the major philosophers of the period, his name was Gentile. He was an idealist, and this goes the idealism in terms of going back to Hegelianism and things like that, the dialectic, all that business. And Gentile had this idea of immanence. This might get a little complicated. I don't think I really understand it, but we're myself. But immanence is a religious term where things come from within themselves rather than from outside. Okay, it's against sort of an anti-Aristotelian position. And so this idea that everything came from within him, from within Mussolini himself. And then Gentile wrote the Doctrine of Fascism to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the foundation of the movement in 1922. So they came out with this in 1933, and it's a terrifying document. It really says that there is no individual has no place. Everything is the state. I think it basically comes down to that. The state is the ultimate entity. The individual has no rights outside the state. Everything is done for the state, et cetera, et cetera. And if you think about it, that's terrifying.
Okay, yeah, as how most dictators are throughout history anyway, where everything is all essentially by the state.
Well, I mean, you have the tyranny, obviously, within the individual versus the state. And then Mussolini came up with what you call the fascist system, which they saw sort of a third way between capitalism and communism. And you have to realize that Mussolini's origins politically were as a socialist, that he really believed in state control of industry. Then he became anti-communist after. I mean, the story of what he did. Went to Switzerland. He dodged the draft. He tried to become a French teacher. I mean, the story of his life really is it's amazing. I don't know exactly where you want to go with this. If you read through all of his documents, you realize just how prolific he was and how interested he was in power. And sometimes I have trouble not putting everything into a personal perspective. There's one film which I always recommend that people see, which is called Vincere in Italian. I can't remember what the English title is. And it's a story of Mussolini's first wife, who apparently never officially married. Her name was Ida Dassler. And they had a child, and Mussolini did not recognize the child. And eventually they were put into insane asylums where they, I don't know how to put this, I'll say they expired. You know, they were, what is the line from Apocalypse Now? They were terminated with extreme prejudice. I don't know, but so he did this to his own son, who died then when he was 27. I think they gave him insulin injections. It's a horrible story, because that family was not in line with his goal and aim to power. So if we go on there, the system that Mussolini invented would be fascism, and fascism is about the corporate state. What does the corporate state mean? It means that the state would have, I think there's 22 corporations for each different section of industry, and the government would be in complete collusion with the industry. So fascism would be a system in which government and industry are completely in cahoots. I think you can understand the kind of power that would involve. During the Great Depression, they came up with a holding company, which became, I think, the largest company in the world, even into the 60s, in which they held majority stakes in many Italian industries, so that he really would pick and choose what part of the economy he wanted to control. And that was the form of totalitarianism that he invented. And the disturbing thing about that is that, as you can see, many of those trends are have been adopted across the world by totalitarian regimes in which they control the economy, they control the information, they control everything. I think I gave a couple of talks around Mussolini on some university campuses. I was invited, and I would tell the students there that I think Mussolini's greatest achievement was that if you compare him to his other colleagues, other
contemporaries at the time.
Yeah, 20th century dictators, I don't know, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, whoever, he didn't actually kill that many of his own citizens as the others, which is kind of a joke, Hitler had 13 years. He killed some people, let's put it that way. I don't know, 25, I don't know how many years Mao had. And they do pro capita studies about how many people a leader actually kills in his own country. And the term is democide, which is for killing people outside of war, putting them into camps, this sort of thing. And so if Mussolini had one accomplishment, this is kind of a joke, he comes in last. Okay. Okay. But that's, so I think I just said I always say there at those talks that's the nicest thing I can say about it.
No worries. Understandable. Yeah. So, I mean, I want to know, like, what is your process on that project for those documents there? I guess one of the main questions I want to ask is, like, were there other documents that you translated and that it just didn't get into the book?
I would just go through and look at anything that was an economic statement, and all those economic statements, the economic plans and the economic speeches that he gave, those are all in the book, and they change over time. I didn't translate anything that was not economic. There was one thing I did not put in there, which I regret, which was Mussolini gave an interview to a journalist right before he was killed, in which he was very, very much in favor of the European Union. The European Union came out of the Treaty of Rome, I think it was in 1957, but there was already talk about the European nations should have a common market and that type of thing. He was very much in favor of that. Obviously, he would have liked to be in charge. But that's one document that I did not put in there, and I regret that. But otherwise, these documents go over, you have to realize that at the beginning of Mussolini's career, he was very, very progressive. A lot of the reforms that were done in terms of the workday, he was against war profiteering and all sorts of things you would think of as being sort of part of very, very similar to what happened in the United States during the New Deal. These type of things, which very, very common among politicians in those days. And then slowly he goes more into this fascist system which he invents. And then by the end of it, when he's in trouble politically, when the Americans invade in 1943, and there's a vote against Mussolini in which he's voted out of office, and his son-in-law actually votes against him. And there's a story there where the Germans captured the son-in-law and they executed him. Mussolini did nothing about it. Against these personal stories are just awful. I mean, they really, if you spend any time thinking about this guy, it just makes you sick to your stomach.
Jeez, wow. And let me also ask you this: like when you go through like each document, how did you go into like providing the historical context of like these documents of when he wrote it? Like obviously, you notice that in Mussolini's life, that he started off in one position, and then as time went on, he went into power. He shifted his own positions. How did you provide the context?
Each chapter has an introductory paragraph in which it gives the context of the speech or the document involved. I think in the book itself, the idea that he changed positions is not really the focus of the book. The focus of the book is economic policies. So what I'm telling you is sort of is my later reaction to it, and how I would present it if I were giving a talk at a university or something like that. That these things that people could kind of tie on to. I see that's how he was. You know what I mean? Instead of the dry facts of the economic policies. But so if you look at the book, each has a chapter explaining the economic and the political context of the speech. Then the speech itself is given with footnotes that indicate, and then the index actually has a series of economic data from the period in terms of, banknote circulation, trade, government expenditure, et cetera, industrial production, strike days, wages, agriculture industry. All those statistics are reported in the back of the book. And then there's an introduction which speaks about Mussolini's career, going from a radical socialist, anti-clerical activist. I guess that's the polite way to put it. And then he changes his mind when he was actually the leader of the Italian Socialist Party, and he was the editor of the Italian Socialist Party newspaper. Within the Socialist Party, there were two streams of thought about World War I. That the socialists were pacifists. They did the working class that had no interest in going to and dying in war. And Mussolini, on the other hand, saw war as a means to further his career. So he broke with the Socialist Party. He volunteered for the war. He was very adept at public relations. There's a fellow who probably, I don't think you've heard of, but there's a poet whose name was Gabriele D'Annunzio, a leading poet and probably cultural figure of the time. And D'Annunzio, most of the theatrical aspects of fascism were taken directly from D'Annunzio, who after World War I went to Fiume, which I guess is in modern Croatia. It's called Rijeka now. And he set up a small dictatorship there for a while. And they wrote a constitution, which was called the Charter of Carnara, from which Mussolini then took a lot of ideas. And there is the idea that D'Annunzio really was all of the influence from Mussolini's methods. After that, when Hitler comes to power in 1933, one of the first things he does is he takes a train down to Venice. And the joke is, he's, hey, Benito, what do I do? And a lot of the skull and crossbones on the SS uniforms come from the uniforms of the shock troops of World War I. Who were there in Fiume. The Roman salute was something that D'Annunzio had seen in an opera in Paris. It goes on and on and on. So this idea that Mussolini invented everything by himself is not true. He came out of D'Annunzio, and then he was in the Socialist Party, and he went to the front where he was injured in battle, and the king came and visited him at his bedside, and this was massively reported throughout the entire press, and he became a leading cultural figure, sort of in competition with D'Annunzio. If you ever get a chance, you should go to Lake Garda and see D'Annunzio's house there. It's got alabaster windows, apparently because he was photophobic. He apparently had venereal disease, which caused him problems with seeing the sight. Anyway, all these stories. I don't know where you want me to go with this, but all these things you bring up Mussolini, there's everything. It's just an immense amount of just. It's confusing. It's also terrifying, and it's very current because of the way things are going in terms of the collusion between politics and industry, which is the essence of fascism. That is the essence of fascism.
Now, any of those economic policies that like Mussolini wrote, do you think was any of those eventually led to like his downfall? Because obviously towards the end of World War II, that was when, the Allies started invading Italy, and then like the northern part of Italy became like the Republic of Salo for Mussolini. Was there anything about Mussolini that, I guess, in your view, like what caused him to cause his downfall per se? Was there any of this economic policies where people are just getting sick and tired of?
He had his economic policies go through a couple of them. He had this thing called the Battle of Grain, in which he wanted Italy to be autarky. It's called autarky, is self-sufficiency, economic self-sufficiency, where the country should produce all of its own products and not rely on foreign trade. So Italy was not self-sufficient in terms of energy, in terms of grain, in terms of iron. So there was this period in which they tried to replace products with indigenous products. They also tried to fix the exchange rate of the Italian lira at 90 lira for the English pound, as if You take it off the free market, basically. Um, but and then he had land reclamation policies in which he went. There was, there in Italy, there's swamp lands in various parts, and these swamps were drained. And then he had, you know, he had urban development projects. The most famous one is the neighborhood over in Rome, which people say it sort of looks like a California university campus. It's kind of a joke, not really. um, so were these economic policies part of his downfall? I don't think so. The economic policies led to a period which is known as the years of consensus, which would be between 1936, 1935. Then Mussolini invades Ethiopia. He's very much interested in joining the imperial club and having colonies. Real estate is real estate. And the English empire, I think they got the best real estate, let's just put it that way, in terms of fertility of agriculture or natural resources. At that time, Italy had Libya, but they didn't know there was oil there. So those periods were sort of known as the years of consensus, in which there was not a great public opposition to Mussolini. You have to realize he had the Ovra, the secret police, going against and finding any kind of forms of opposition within the country. What they would do is that they would put them into eternal exile down in remote villages and have them go to the city hall and sign their name every day to prove that they were there. And then they did murder opposition leaders who were outside the country. Did that lead to his downfall? What really led to Mussolini's downfall was World War II. And the ever closing relationship he had with Nazi Germany. This really began in earnest, I think, the years 38 or 37. I'm a little fuzzy on the dates. These, in which they passed the racial statutes against Italian Jews, in which Italian Jews were not allowed to own more than a certain amount of land, were not allowed to marry outside their religion, were not allowed to hold public office. And there's a couple of other restrictions, which I lost me right now. This is in 1938, called the racial statutes. And then eventually, Mussolini. Then, when the war came and there was the pact between Soviet Union and Germany to partition, was it Finland and Poland in 1939? Mussolini, after that, there's the fake war in 1940, in which the English and the French had declared war on Germany, but the war didn't really start. It did when Germany took France. Mussolini declared war on Britain, and then he eventually declared war on the United States. And there's the famous story of his minister or his ambassador, I can't remember exactly which one, bringing him the Brooklyn phone book and showing him how many Italian last names are in the Brooklyn phone book and saying that we can't win this war just on sheer numbers. And Mussolini there in Villa Torlona, you can go to the house actually in Rome where he lived. It's a park. It's very strange to walk in there. Anyway, but Mussolini thought, because of his experience in World War I, where Italy did not get all of the territorial concessions that they'd hoped for by joining the war late. His idea was that he was going to be on the winning side of World War II. He sends a couple 100,000, I don't know how many 100,000 troops to Russia, including my uncle. And then it turns out he's actually not on the winning side of the war. And he's voted out of power in 1943. It's July when the Americans take Sicily. And at this point, he begins. Italy at that point is in a war theater, but you have to realize the mountainous nature of the country. It's a very difficult country to conquer because it's so mountainous. So what happened was the Allies invaded from France, the Beauce, the plains around Normandy, which is all flat. So that's when the invasion came. So I think I don't know the exact dates, but I think that the year that when Berlin finally fell and when Milan or whatever it was up in north in Italy, the dates are very, very close. That the progress up the Italian peninsula for the Anglo-American troops was very, very torturous, and that led to sort of a state of civil war in northern Italy. In fact, there's a region in the north, up the northwest of Italy called Ossola region, was actually declared independence for a while.
You were mentioning that you said your uncle was fought on for the Italians on the Eastern Front, you said?
Well, you see, that's the other thing about these stories. You know, I'm of an age where I knew. I mean, I had met my great grandfather who was in World War One. He lost an eye against the Austrians. I remember very clearly. It went like this, you know, and showed me the. It's not something to forget as a kid.
I remember my dad my dad is a Vietnam War vet. You know, he worked with the Americans. You know, but, you know, he has like really bad teeth. So all he had is just dentures. So, you know, he would like terrify me by just popping out his dentures and would just like tease me with it. And obviously, yeah, that doesn't leave your memory as like a kid.
It's indelible. It's indelible. You remember that very clearly. It takes your eye out. Anyway, and that's what gave me an understanding what war is. And he was there and they shot his eye out. Goodness. I don't think I want to go into a war. Anyway, so no, most of my male relatives were involved in the Italian. One of my other uncles was in Albania, which was a disaster for the Italian. You know, the Italians were not prepared to fight World War II. And his stories about there were mainly, he wrote poems about donkeys who didn't want to carry them. We actually translated them and published them. Anyway, and then my other uncle, my grandfather was a doctor, and he was involved in, you know, he was in Italy there for a while, and there was the famous date in September 8th in 1943 where the Italians switched sides, where the Italian General Badoglio makes a statement on the radio saying that all Italian troops should defend themselves from whence they are attacked, not declaring exactly which side they're on, so that Northern Italy was a complete chaos. And this is the period in which the deportations of Jews began, in which you know, there were the bombings. My father would tell me stories about the Americans bombing northern Italy there and all that sort of thing. So I have these. The book is none of this personal stuff is in the book at all. But, you know, if I go and speak somewhere, then it's helpful to, you know, sort of bring sort of a personal aspect to it so people can understand. Oh, I see. Your father, your uncle's main memory of being in Albania was that he couldn't get a donkey to pull the equipment, you know, and they weren't going to eat that night because of it. So it's like, you know, big deal.
Well, actually, no, like, I never knew this side of you, actually, besides, you know, the book that you wrote. I never knew that you also have family members that were involved in the Italian aspects of that era.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. My mother's actually Finnish, and she was born in Viipuri, where, and so she was a refugee after when the Russians took Viipuri. So there's those stories. I mean, it's not. Let's just say that the stories I heard from my relatives does not make you very pro-war. I just put it that way. Everybody suffers, everybody dies, and there's nothing to eat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and Mussolini was he's a bit
out there, yeah. So I understand that you also study at the universities in Italy as well.
Yeah.
Have you ever visited any of the locations that of like where Mussolini resided, or even like you mentioned like Gabriel D'Annunzio?
Yeah, his house up there. Yeah. His house is the Vittoriale on Lago di Garda, and Mussolini took Villa Torlone. Is Villa Torlone? I can't remember. Villa Torlone, I think. They're in Rome, which is now a park, and you can go and walk through the. Actually, the most interesting thing about Mussolini in Rome is that during the 30s, he wanted to build a colossal statue of himself, which is going to be, I don't know how many hundreds of feet high, and have it to span Rome, you know, sort of like the Colossus of Rhodes. And I think they eventually built a foot before things got bad and they stopped it. But in terms of meeting people, I mean, when I did that book on Benigni had me go and meet concentration camp survivors down there in Rome who had been in Auschwitz, and talk to them about the experiences of Italians in Auschwitz. So yeah, I mean, I'm old enough to have met these people and be humbled sort of by the horror of their experiences.
Have you visited Mussolini's grave?
No, Mussolini is he's from Predapio, which is a region around Emilia-Romagna. They have there's what do you call this? A stereotype about the character of men from that region, which is they're a little bit hot-headed. That they're, like the guy will cut you off on the freeway. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So no, I'm not a big Mussolini fan. I think I made that pretty clear. No, I didn't. I mean, I wouldn't go there.
No, okay, no, understandable. I just figured like since that's his gravesite right there, and obviously a lot of like the more his legions, I guess, the modern day fascists would visit there. I mean, and obviously, like I don't adhere to any political affiliations of my own. I just figured, oh, why not visit like a historical site, so to speak? But it's fine.
Well, I mean, the Mussolini's death is also very interesting. I mean, he was killed with his lover Petacci there in Dongo and on the lake, and then he was brought to Milan where they hung him upside down by piano wire it's now a bus station, Piazzale Loreto. I remember as a kid, we were there in the 70s. I was there. I mean, one of the reasons I'm actually in this country is when during the 70s, there was the Red Brigade's terrorist movement in Italy. And that's one of the reasons why we actually left, because it was such a mess that period. Anyway, the student, they would shout at each other, Piazzale Loreto would be the thing that one group would shout against the fascists. And anyway, Italian history is so complicated, and all these things and all these conspiracy theories, and it's a bit of a mess. So no, I have not gone and visited these Mussolini places. I stuck mainly to his Opera Omnia, which is the collection of all of his written works, which is about, I think it must be 20 volumes, thousands of pages. And I think it's even available. You can get it online very easily and go through it. It has not been translated. And then I relied on some of his biographies. But other than that, the charge of the book was to find his economic policies. I think the editors there were interested in the relevance of such policies to present day the West in the present. And I must admit that they were prescient in that this idea of the relationship between government and industry as being, I think they call it, what do they call it? It's referred to as like an inverted totalitarianism these days, in which, the power of corporations over politics is symbiotic, whatever. And I think that's what they were hoping to get out of the book, and they probably wanted more references to American relevance. I must say there was a documentary film on Mussolini made in the 30s, which was narrated by Lowell Thomas, who was like the premier journalist of his generation, and it did very well at the box office. It made like $1 million, which is a ton of money back then. And Mussolini was really seen by American politicians as somebody who get things done, a man of destiny. He didn't have to deal with all of the niceties of a constitutional republic. And so a lot of the politicians at that period found that attractive. When the book came out, I think I was contacted by lots of journalists and newspapers in England in particular, who were nervous about Trump, and they wanted me to say that Trump was like Mussolini. And I said, I don't know. I know what fascism is. This is what fascism is. And if Trump does that, then he would be a fascist at this point. I don't know. And once I told them that they never contacted me again, because I don't think that's what they wanted to hear.
Anyways, besides that, then, do you have any other projects coming up for yourself, like more books being written in the process? Or
yeah, I've got a book coming out on Machiavelli, which is the subtitle is going to be. Machiavelli is known by this statement of the ends justify the means, and I think there's a problem in international scholarship of Machiavelli where they all read him in translation, and they're missing something. Where Machiavelli really was an extremist. He was really advocated extremism in action and in word, and not so much of this cynical idea that he's identified with, but really as an extremist. And he had a tremendous sense of humor. So that book is coming out. And then got a book on rhetoric, which It's also influenced by this Mussolini book, and then I've got friends who realize I can write books, and they send me their anecdotes, and so I turned them into a book. I got a friend who's like a top salesman. He sent me all of his sales techniques, and so we stuck it into a book. I think we're going to come out on Amazon pretty soon. And there's one other, which I don't care, but anyway, there's like 3 or 4 coming out. If I had to give any advice, I'd say it's okay to write one book, but writing 20, it seems a little bit silly. At this point, I don't think I can stop. I don't know what's going on, So no, those books are coming out, but none of them are impressive at this moment. It's about it.
All righty then. Well, I think that actually then this about wraps up for my podcast here at for the Regimes Museum. I really appreciate you coming on to share your perspectives here on your book and share your knowledge on Mussolini about this one here, Carlo.
Well, I think you have to realize that a lot of these things are from what I have seen and taken from my own personal experience and reading the economic documents. But the topic is so vast that if anybody's interested, I think they really have to read a wide variety of sources and make up their own minds about things. You know what I mean? Especially on this topic, because the influence that he had was disturbingly wide. Let me put it that way.
All right. Well then, Carlo, you have a good evening then.
You too. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this interview, be sure to like and subscribe. Regimes Museum is a non-profit educational institution that studies the phenomenon of tyranny and dictatorship across history and culture. Find out more at www.regimes.museum.org.